Welcome to the deep dive. We are just so thrilled you're here with us today.
Absolutely. It is great to be here.
If you've got your notes ready, you know we have a pretty massive stack of theological sources in front of us today.
Acid is the right word.
Yeah. We're talking detailed charts, extensive historical notes, and some really comprehensive analyses. And it is all centered around one huge topic.
Things to come.
Right. Eschatological. The end times.
Which is a topic that carries a lot of baggage for people.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, before your mind jumps to, apocalyptic movies or intricate timelines scrawled all over a whiteboard with red yarn.
Right, the conspiracy board look.
Exactly. I want to set the premise for you.
Yeah.
We are taking all of this dense, incredibly rich source material, and we're just extracting the absolute most essential insights.
That is the goal. Because it is so easy to get lost in the weeds of prophecy.
So easy.
And then you just miss the forest entirely.
Mm-hmm.
The sources we are looking at are meticulously detailed, but they all point toward a much larger, cohesive narrative.
And that brings us to the core mission of our deep dive today.
Yeah, let's frame this up.
The central question we want you, the listener, to hold in your mind as we go through all this is simply, how can understanding this theological truth about the end times actually deepen your love for Christ?
Yeah.
And help you live more devotedly to him right now, today, on a random Tuesday morning?
That's the crux of it. It's not just about predicting the future.
No, not at all.
It is about how the absolute certainty of the future changes your present reality.
It fundamentally alters your perspective.
It really does. When we look at the big picture presented in these sources,
Spanning both the Old and New Testament.
right, the overwhelming takeaway is that history is not it's not a random sequence of chaotic events.
It feels like it sometimes.
It definitely feels like it, but it is not a cyclical wheel of meaninglessness. History is linear.
It's going somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is moving purposefully toward a very specific, orchestrated climax. God is in absolute control of the timeline.
And to anchor that thought, there is a striking quote from the German theologian Helmut Thielicke, provided right at the top of our source material.
Oh, I love this quote.
I read this and it literally gave me chills.
Yeah, it's powerful.
So Thielicke writes that when the drama of history finally ends, the curtain falls and the lights come up, all the great, imposing figures of human history,
Right. Pharaoh, Alexander the Great.
Winston Churchill, Joseph Stalin, they will all suddenly realize they were merely, and this is the quote, bit actors in a drama produced by another.
Bit actors.
And Jesus Christ will stand completely alone on the stage as the central figure of all reality.
It is a breathtaking image. It instantly reduces the massive, intimidating empires of our world to their proper scale.
And all the anxieties they produce in us, too.
Exactly. If history is a play, the final act belongs entirely to the author. For you, the listener, understanding that the author has already written that final scene, that's what provides unshakable peace, regardless of what the current scene looks like.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to truly understand that final scene, the sources emphasize that we have to understand the two distinct appearances of Christ in history.
Right. The scriptural narrative presents two very different faces of the deliverer.
Which actually deeply puzzled the early believers.
Oh, they were profoundly confused by it. And the ancient prophets themselves, too.
It makes sense why.
It does. The Old Testament prophets were given these visions, but they were essentially looking at two distant mountain peaks.
Just seeing the peaks, but unable to see the massive valley of time between them.
Exactly. On one peak, they saw a suffering servant. On the other peak, they saw a reigning king.
And they couldn't reconcile how the Messiah could be both simultaneously.
They just couldn't put those two images together.
So let's start with that first peak, the first coming, the suffering servant. Our sources point directly to the book of Isaiah.
Specifically chapter 53.
Right, as the ultimate blueprint.
Isaiah 53 is arguably one of the most astonishing texts in antiquity.
It really is.
Our sources highlight that this single chapter, written hundreds of years before the birth of Jesus, lists 15 highly specific, distinct details about his death.
And the manner of his suffering.
Yes. It describes him being despised and rejected, remaining entirely silent before his accusers, being pierced for transgressions.
And uniquely, this is the one that gets me, being assigned a grave with the wicked, yet ultimately being buried with the rich.
Right. And it even prophesies his resurrection, that after the suffering of his soul, he would see the light of life.
The specificity is just, it's incredible. It's not a vague, someone will come and have a hard time.
No, it is forensic in its detail.
Forensic, that's a great word for it. And our notes include a mind-blowing statistical fact regarding this.
The probability math.
Yes. Mathematicians have actually calculated the odds of just 8 of these specific prophecies being fulfilled in the exact life of one single human being.
Just 8 out of the 15.
Just 8. The odds are 1 in 10 to the 17th power.
That is... It's hard to even comprehend that number.
Yeah. For you listening, trying to visualize that is a 1 followed by 17 zeros.
To put that in perspective, the sources use this classic illustration. You take that number of silver dollars...
10 to the 17th silver dollars.
Right. And you lay them across the entire state of Texas.
Which is huge.
Massive. They would cover the entire state 2 feet deep.
2 feet deep in silver coins over all of Texas.
Now, you mark one single silver dollar, stir up the entire mass across the whole state, blindfold a person, and tell them they can travel as far as they wish.
Okay.
But they must pick up that one marked coin on the very first try.
Unbelievable.
That is the mathematical probability of just 8 of these prophecies happening by chance. It moves way beyond statistical anomaly.
Into the realm of absolute divine orchestration.
Exactly. It demands a response.
And the theological why behind this first coming is equally crucial. The sources point to Hebrews 2.14.
Right. He didn't come the first time to overthrow Rome.
Or set up a political kingdom.
No. He came, as the text says, to conquer Satan judicially. By becoming human and enduring that exact prophesied death, he broke the power of the one who holds the power of death.
The first coming was a rescue mission of redemption.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the second mountain peak the prophets saw.
The second coming, the reigning king.
Right. If the first coming was about securing judicial victory, the second coming is about executing that victory on a cosmic scale.
The transition here is so stark. The sources reference Zechariah 9.9 and 10.
Yeah, look at the shift in those verses.
The first part of the prophecy is the humble king riding on a donkey, which is the first coming.
But the very next verse shifts completely.
It says he will proclaim peace to the nations, and his rule will extend from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth.
That is a literal global rule of peace. No more suffering servant. This is absolute sovereignty.
And to fully grasp the weight of this return, the source material dives into the original Greek language used in the New Testament.
Oh, I love this section. There are 3 key terms used by the biblical authors to describe the second coming, and the nuances are incredibly rich.
Let's break those down. What's the first one?
The first is parousia.
Parousia. I've definitely heard that one thrown around in theological circles.
Yes, parousia literally translates to presence, coming, or arrival.
Okay.
But in the ancient world, it wasn't just any arrival. It was the technical term used for the official visit of an emperor.
Or a high-ranking official to a province, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It implied a glorious authoritative presence that demanded preparation and reverence from the citizens.
So when the New Testament uses parousia,
It's signaling the arrival of the ultimate high king to his domain.
that changes the tone completely. It's not a quiet sneak visit.
Not at all.
What about the second term?
The second is apocalypse.
No, in modern English, we use apocalypse to mean like a catastrophic end-of-the-world disaster.
Right, like zombies or meteors. But the Greek word apocalypsis simply means revelation.
Or an unveiling.
Exactly. It is the pulling back of a curtain. Currently, Christ's full glory is veiled from the world's eyes.
But the second coming is the apocalypse.
Yes. The moment the veil is permanently removed and the reality of who he is becomes visible to every single eye.
That ties perfectly back to that Thelic quote, the curtain lifting on the drama.
It's the exact same imagery.
And the third term,
Epiphany, or epiphania.
meaning.
It means appearance, or to shine forth. It was often used to describe the sudden, brilliant appearance of a deity to mortals.
Or the dawning of the sun bringing light into darkness.
It speaks to the sudden, overwhelming brightness and clarity that his return will bring to a really dark world.
So think about what this means for you listening right now. When you view Jesus not just as the ultimate sacrifice who secured your redemption,
Though that is amazing in itself.
of course, but also as the ultimate sovereign whose arrival will be an unveiling of pure glory, it naturally inspires a deeper, more reverent devotion.
It bridges that gap between profound gratitude for what he did and awe-filled anticipation for what he will do.
And that anticipation is not meant to be a passive waiting game.
No. And that brings us to a crucial insight from the sources regarding the actual purpose of prophecy.
This is huge.
Neither the Old Testament prophets nor the New Testament apostles wrote about Christ's return to give us speculative trivia.
Or puzzle pieces to build elaborate date-setting timelines.
Right. No yarn and pushpins on a corkboard.
Exactly. The motive for prophecy in the scriptures was always to produce practical daily holiness in the life of the believer.
The sources cite Titus 2.13 and 1 John 3.3 here. We are told to wait for the blessed hope, the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior.
And John says that everyone who has this hope fixed on him purifies himself just as he is pure.
The perhaps today mindset. I really love how the notes phrase that.
Me too. If you genuinely believe that the curtain could lift today, that the Parisia could happen at any moment, it radically shifts how you conduct your business.
How you speak to your family.
What you value. Looking forward to that blessed hope is the very foundation for living a pure life today.
The analogy often used is, you don't clean your house because you enjoy the act of cleaning.
I certainly don't.
Right. You clean it because you know a deeply honored guest is arriving.
What's fascinating here is how this call to holiness is juxtaposed against what the sources outline as the inevitable period of extreme opposition.
The opposition to God that will precede Christ's ultimate victory.
Because the scriptures do not paint a picture of the world gradually getting better and better until it seamlessly merges into heaven.
No, they predict a severe escalation of rebellion.
The tribulation. The notes are very clear that Satan is currently operating as the god of this age.
Temporarily permitted to wield influence.
And this influence will culminate in the rise of a specific figure, or a concentrated system of opposition known as the Antichrist.
The text defines this figure as the liar, who adamantly denies the Father and the Son.
The methods outlined in the sources regarding the Antichrist are particularly striking.
Because this opposition won't just be philosophical. It will be empowered by Satan to act supernaturally.
Designed to deceive the masses.
Furthermore, it will demand absolute political allegiance, merging state power with compulsory worship.
And the economic pressure. The sources mention the infamous mark on the right hand or forehead.
Right.
And without getting bogged down in speculating what the exact technology or mechanism of that mark is.
Which people love to do.
They do. But the underlying principle in the text is terrifyingly clear. It's massive, inescapable economic coercion.
If you do not bow to the system, you cannot buy, you cannot sell.
You cannot participate in society. You are economically starved out.
Which is exactly why that spirit of the Antichrist, that pressure to compromise your devotion to Christ for the sake of societal acceptance or economic survival.
It's already at work.
The apostles said as much in the first century. This makes the study of these future events deeply relevant to your daily spiritual vigilance.
Right. If you aren't cultivating that perhaps today devotion now in times of relative peace, how will you stand when the pressure to compromise becomes absolute?
That is a very sobering question.
It is, and it leads us right into one of the most heavily debated topics in all of our source material.
The rapture.
The rapture. Now, I want to set some firm ground rules for you as we dive into this. Our sources provide detailed charts of the different scholarly views on the timing of the rapture.
There are quite a few views.
There are. We are not going to take sides, champion one view, or tell you which one is definitively right.
Because godly, brilliant scholars who deeply love the scriptures have landed on different sides of this for centuries.
Exactly. Our goal is to impartially explore how they interpret the timing of the rapture in relation to that 7-year period of tribulation we just discussed.
So let's look at the first view presented in the charts, the pre-tribulation rapture.
Okay, pre-tribulation. Break that down for us.
The pre-tribulation view argues that Christ will come for his saints, meaning the church, before the 7-year tribulation begins.
Before any of the bad stuff starts.
Right. The primary argument here is that believers are explicitly promised exemption from divine wrath.
The sources cite 1 Thessalonians 1.10 here, which says Jesus rescues us from the coming wrath.
This view also heavily stresses the doctrine of imminency.
The idea that Christ could return at literally any moment, with no prerequisite signs needing to be fulfilled first.
Yes. But the charts also list the arguments against this view.
Let's hear the counter-arguments.
Critics of pre-tribulationism point out that exemption from God's wrath does not necessarily mean exemption from all tribulation or persecution.
Because Christians have endured severe persecution throughout history.
Exactly. There's also a deep dive in the notes into the Greek word ek, which is often translated as out of, in the context of being kept out of the hour of trial.
What's the debate there?
Critics argue the normative Greek meaning of ek means out from the midst of, implying believers go into the trial but are protected through it.
Ah, rather than being entirely snatched away beforehand.
Right. Moving to the second view, we have mid-tribulationism.
Mid-tribulation, so right in the middle.
This perspective argues that the rapture occurs exactly halfway through the 7-year tribulation, at the 3.5-year mark.
What's the reasoning there?
The proponents of this view argue that it avoids the extremes. They note that the first half of the tribulation is characterized by the wrath of man and the Antichrist.
But the second half is the poured-out wrath of God.
Therefore, the church goes through the wrath of man, but is raptured before the divine wrath begins.
That makes sense structurally.
They also link the seventh trumpet in Revelation 11, which happens mid-tribulation, to the trumpet mentioned in 1 Thessalonians 4 that sounds at the rapture.
But the arguments against mid-tribulationism, according to our notes, focus heavily on the loss of that imminency we talked about.
Yes.
Because if the rapture cannot happen until exactly 3.5 years after the Antichrist makes a peace treaty,
then believers aren't looking for Christ to return at any moment.
they're looking for the Antichrist and counting days on a calendar.
Additionally, critics argue that linking the two trumpets, purely because they share the word trumpet, is structurally weak.
Because trumpets were used for many different signals in biblical times, not just one specific event.
Exactly. Then we have the post-tribulation view.
Okay, post-tribulation.
This is the perspective that the rapture and the second coming are not separated by years, but are actually one simultaneous event at the very end of the tribulation.
The arguments for this one are fascinating. Proponents point to the parables of Jesus, specifically the wheat and the tares.
Right. In that parable, Jesus explicitly says that the wheat believers and the tares unbelievers grow together until the harvest at the very end of the age.
And only then is the separation made.
Furthermore, they point out that the New Testament uses those Greek words we discussed earlier, parousia, epiphany, interchangeably.
Without distinguishing between a secret rapture and a public return.
However, the sources note significant challenges to the post-tribulation view as well.
What are the main pushbacks?
Well, if every single living believer is glorified and given a resurrection body at the end of the tribulation, and all unbelievers are judged,
It creates a theological problem for populating the subsequent earthly millennial kingdom.
exactly, who is left in natural flesh and blood bodies to repopulate the earth during that time?
That's a huge logistical question in this framework.
Also, like the mid-tribulation view, it conflicts with the teaching to constantly wait and watch for an imminent, any moment return.
Finally, the charts present a lesser-known view, the partial rapture.
The partial rapture.
The argument here is that only watchful, spiritually mature, and completely dedicated believers will be raptured.
In this view, the rapture isn't a guarantee for everyone who simply professes faith.
It is a reward to be actively strived for.
The pushback against the partial rapture view is quite strong in theological circles, though.
I can imagine. What's the primary counter-argument?
The main counter is that the rapture is a facet of salvation, which is fundamentally by grace, not by works or spiritual merit.
So, if rapturing requires a certain level of spiritual maturity, it introduces a works-based salvation dynamic.
Moreover, critics point to 1 Corinthians 15, which emphatically states that all believers will be changed in the twinkling of an eye, not just an elite subset.
For you listening, swimming through all these timelines, it can feel really overwhelming.
Oh, absolutely. It's a lot of data.
But regardless of where you land on the timeline, the central anchoring truth across all these views is that Jesus rescues his people.
That is the beautiful takeaway.
Whether he rescues them before the storm, sustains them through the storm and pulls them out halfway, or meets them at the very end of the storm, the rescuer is coming.
And knowing that his ultimate plan includes your rescue should fuel a profound love and trust in him today.
Not anxiety over calendars.
Perfectly said. The timing may be debated, but the reality of the rescue is absolute.
Which brings us to another intricately debated concept in our sources. The Millennium Maze. I really love that title from the notes. Let me set the stage for this one. The book of Revelation, specifically chapter 20, verses 1 through 10, is the only passage in the entire Bible that explicitly mentions a 1,000-year period where Satan is bound and Christ reigns.
And because it's isolated to this one highly symbolic apocalyptic book, how you interpret these 10 verses dramatically changes your view of the entire end times timeline.
Absolutely. Our charts break down four major perspectives on this thousand-year reign. And again, keeping to our neutral exploration, let's look at the what and the why for each.
Let's start with amillennialism.
Amillennialism.
The prefix a means no, but it's slightly misleading. Amillennialists don't believe there is no millennium. They believe the 1,000 years is a symbolic number.
Representing the present church age.
Exactly, spanning from Christ's first coming all the way to his second.
So we are in the millennium right now.
Yes. In this view, Christ is currently ruling in the hearts of believers, and Satan is currently bound in the sense that he cannot stop the spread of the gospel to the nations.
The pros of this view are that it beautifully fits the unity of the Old and New Testaments under one continuous covenant of grace.
It's simple and avoids the complexities of a hybrid earthly kingdom.
But the charts note the cons. Critics of amillennialism argue that it heavily spiritualizes prophecies that they believe should be taken literally.
For instance, if the Old Testament prophesied a literal, physical kingdom for national Israel,
Amillennialism spiritualizes those promises to mean the church.
critics argue this denies a specific, future fulfillment for national Israel.
Next is postmillennialism.
This view states that the preaching of the gospel will be so wildly successful that it will gradually Christianize the entire world.
Just a total global victory for the gospel.
Yes, and this success will usher in a literal golden age of peace and righteousness, a millennium after which Christ will return.
The optimism of this view is just incredible. The main argument for it is that it takes the Great Commission incredibly seriously.
It views the kingdom of God like the mustard seed Jesus described, starting small but inevitably growing to cover the entire world. It expects the gospel to win in history.
It is a deeply hopeful view. However, the criticism against postmillennialism is experiential and scriptural.
Critics point out that both historical observation and certain scriptural passages suggest the world will be characterized by spiritual decline.
Apostasy and the rise of the Antichrist in the end times.
Right, not a steady, constant moral improvement leading to a golden age.
Then we move into the premillennial views, starting with historic premillennialism.
This view says Christ returns first, and then establishes a literal 1,000-year earthly reign.
The arguments for historic premillennialism are strong regarding tradition. It aligns very closely with the writings of the earliest church fathers.
It also takes a straightforward chronological reading of Revelation chapters 10 through 20.
Christ returns in chapter 19, and the millennium begins in chapter 20. In this view, the church is seen as the spiritual Israel, inheriting the promises.
But the cons. Critics argue that Christ is already reigning in heaven, making an earthly political reign seem like a step backward.
Furthermore, they point out the logistical strangeness of mixing glorified, resurrected saints with natural, flesh-and-blood humans on earth for 1,000 years.
It seems highly unrealistic to some scholars.
Finally, we have dispensational premillennialism.
This view also believes Christ returns before a literal 1,000-year reign, but it maintains a strict, unyielding distinction between national Israel and the church.
They see God as having two distinct plans for these two distinct groups.
This view usually features the two-stage return we discussed earlier, separated by a 7-year tribulation.
The massive pro for this view, according to the sources, is its highly consistent literal hermeneutic.
The hermeneutic just being a method of interpretation.
Right. Dispensationalists apply the exact same literal interpretation to Old Testament prophecies about Israel as they do to the New Testament.
They believe every single land promise made to Abraham and David must be fulfilled literally on earth to the ethnic nation of Israel.
And the cons are equally focused on that hermeneutic. Critics of dispensationalism argue that the New Testament authors themselves reinterpreted Old Testament promises.
They argue the New Testament explicitly states that the church is the new Israel, built on the foundation of Christ.
And that the conditional promises made to national Israel were forfeited through disobedience and unbelief.
So what does this all mean? We've got symbols, golden ages, early church fathers, and literal hermeneutics.
If you are listening and feeling like you just walked out of a seminary exam, take a breath.
The takeaway here is not to force you into a theological box. While scholars vigorously debate the exact mechanics, the timelines, and the precise nature of the 1,000 years,
They all universally agree on the undeniable, glorious fact that Jesus Christ is returning to set the world right.
the king is coming back to reclaim his kingdom. The debate is over the administration of that kingdom, not the certainty of it.
Exactly. The author is returning to the stage. Now, moving from the macro timeline of the Earth to the micro reality of the individual.
This is where it gets very personal.
What happens when a person dies? This brings us to segment 5, the intermediate state and the physical resurrection. This is the burning question for everyone. Where are the dead right now?
It is the most universal human question. And the scriptural view provided in our sources is incredibly clear and comforting for the believer.
What does the text say?
The Apostle Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 5:8
Yeah.
that he prefers to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord.
So the moment a believer's physical body dies, their conscious spirit is immediately in the presence of Christ.
Yes, they enter a condition of conscious joy, rest, and peace.
I want to highlight something explicitly stated in the source notes here. There is absolutely no biblical evidence found in these texts for purgatory.
None.
There is no intermediate waiting room where you purge your remaining sins through suffering. Christ's work on the cross was entirely sufficient.
The notes also dispel the concept of soul sleep.
Which is the idea that the soul remains unconscious until the final resurrection.
Right. When the New Testament uses the term sleep for death, it is always and exclusively referring to the physical body resting in the grave.
The spirit, the true essence of the person, is vibrantly awake and conscious with God.
But the sources are equally clear about those who reject Christ.
Right. Unbelievers who die are also entirely conscious. However, they are not in joy. They are awaiting final judgment in a state of suffering.
The text uses the story Jesus told of the rich man and Lazarus to illustrate this immediate conscious reality.
The Old Testament used the term Sheol for the realm of the dead, and the New Testament uses the Greek term Hades.
It is a profound reality check. But for the believer, this intermediate state, being a spirit with the Lord, is wonderful.
Yet it is not the final, complete picture of human redemption.
Because God didn't create humans to be disembodied spirits floating in the ether. He created us as physical beings in a physical world.
Therefore, total redemption must include the physical body.
The resurrection of the body. Romans 8:23 talks about us groaning inwardly as we wait eagerly for the redemption of our bodies.
God cares deeply about physicality. Matters to him. He made it, and he is going to redeem it.
And the ultimate proof of this is the resurrection of Jesus himself. The sources emphasize that when Jesus rose from the dead, he didn't rise as a ghost.
He ate fish with his disciples. He could be touched.
And the detail from the text that always moves me, they recognized him by the scars in his hands and his side.
His new, glorified, indestructible body was intimately, recognizably related to his old, mortal body.
The scars remained as eternal trophies of his grace.
Our notes indicate that our new bodies will be like his. They will be related to our old ones. We will be recognizably ourselves, but they will be immortal, imperishable, and free from the corruption of sin and disease.
And it is important to note the timing outlined in the text. There is a first resurrection, which encompasses all believers being raised to eternal life at Christ's coming.
Then, separated by time, there is a second resurrection. This is the resurrection of all unbelievers, who are raised physically to stand before the final judgment.
Which is a heavy but necessary transition to segment 6, the judgments and the reality of hell.
For many believers, the word judgment brings immediate fear. But our sources draw a massive, crucial distinction between two different judgments that absolutely must be understood.
It's vital to alleviate that fear and inspire true devotion. The distinction is paramount.
So the first judgment mentioned in our notes is the judgment seat of Christ.
The Greek word here is bema. In ancient Corinth, the bema seat was a raised, literal platform in the center of the city.
But it wasn't a criminal court where people were sentenced to death?
No, it was the place where civic officials handed out rewards to citizens, or where the judges of the athletic games awarded crowns to the victorious runners.
And the sources emphasize this is for believers only. Standing at the bema seat of Christ does not decide your salvation.
Your salvation was decided the moment you trusted Christ, and the penalty for your sins was fully paid on the cross.
You will never face penal judgment for your sin. Instead, the bema seat is an appraisal of your works as a believer.
It is for adjustment, reward, or the loss of reward.
The analogy used in 1 Corinthians 3 is so vivid. It compares our life's work for Christ to building materials.
Some things we do are like wood, hay, and straw things, done for selfish ambition or out of fleshly motives.
These will be burned up in the refining fire of his gaze.
But other things done in love, in secret for his glory, are like gold, silver, and precious stones. These survive the fire and result in eternal reward.
It is a judgment of our stewardship, not our souls.
Yeah.
But the second judgment, this is entirely different.
The Great White Throne Judgment.
The Great White Throne.
This is exclusively for unbelievers. It is the final, ultimate assize at the end of history.
The texts state that right before this occurs, Satan and his demonic forces are finally and permanently judged and cast into the lake of fire.
Then the dead who rejected God are resurrected to stand before this throne. There are no rewards here. It is a judgment that leads to eternal separation from God.
The reality of hell, it is an incredibly somber topic, and frankly, one our modern culture absolutely hates to discuss.
The biblical descriptions are terrifying. Outer darkness, a lake of fire, weeping and gnashing of teeth.
And the psychological torment of utter aloneness. The notes quote C.S. Lewis here, and it is perhaps one of the most profound insights into the nature of hell.
Lewis wrote that hell is, in essence, nothing but yourself for all eternity.
He famously stated that the doors of hell are locked from the inside.
It is the ultimate culmination of a human soul telling God, "Leave me alone."
God finally says, "Thy will be done," and grants them an eternity entirely devoid of his presence, his light, and his goodness.
When you remove God, who is the source of all joy, all peace, and all love, what is left is the absolute absence of those things.
But why is it necessary? The theological necessity of hell is rooted in God's absolute holiness. Our sources provide a stark analogy.
Could God, as a perfect righteous judge, simply look at a figure like Adolf Hitler and let him go without any payment for his unspeakable crimes?
If a human judge did that, we would demand their removal for being entirely unjust.
God's character is perfectly holy. It must naturally, inevitably revolt against sin. To simply ignore sin would mean God is not perfectly just.
Hell exists because God is immutably holy, and human choices have eternal gravity.
Now, based on Chart 88 in our sources, there's a theological debate even here that we must present impartially.
The debate between annihilationism and eternal torment.
Annihilationism is the view that the unsaved do not suffer consciously forever but are eventually destroyed and simply cease to exist.
Proponents argue that unending conscious torment seems entirely inconsistent with the infinite love and mercy of God. They argue that destruction means final extinction.
It is an understandable human struggle with the severity of the doctrine. However, the opposing argument on the chart, representing the traditional view of eternal torment, focuses heavily on the actual words of Jesus.
Specifically, in Matthew 25.46, Jesus says the wicked will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life.
The exact same Greek word, aionios, is used for both.
The linguistic argument is that if the life of the believer is consciously forever and ever, the text demands that the punishment of the unbeliever is of the exact same duration.
It is a weighty, heavy reality.
And it is precisely this sobering reality that makes the final segment of our deep dive shine with such blinding, brilliant light. Segment 7, the ultimate hope, heaven, and the eternal state.
After the judgments, after the old order passes away, what is left?
The definition provided in our text is the simplest yet the most unimaginably profound definition of heaven I have ever heard. Just 3 words.
Where God is.
Where God is. That is the essence of it. Heaven isn't primarily about the golden streets or the pearly gates, though the imagery is beautiful.
The central defining characteristic of heaven is unhindered, unveiled access to the creator of the universe.
And I want to emphatically, completely reject the pop culture myth of heaven right now.
The facetious idea that we are going to be issued a harp, assigned a puffy white cloud, and sit around for 10 billion years plucking strings in a state of eternal lobotomized boredom.
That image is actually a tragic distortion. The biblical picture of the eternal state is the most dynamic, constantly expanding, exhilarating experience conceivable to the human mind.
God is infinite. That means exploring his goodness, his creativity, and his universe will take an eternity, and you will never reach the end of it.
The sources describe a new heaven and a new earth. It is a physical, redeemed universe. It says there will be no more sea, which to the ancient mind meant no more separation or chaotic danger.
God will personally wipe away every single tear from our eyes. There will be no more death, mourning, crying, or pain. The old order of entropy and decay is entirely gone.
And in this new reality, we engage in meaningful, joyful existence. The texts talk about the specific crowns awarded to believers at that bema seat, the crown of life, the crown of glory, the crown of righteousness.
These aren't hats to stroke our egos. The book of Revelation paints a beautiful image of the elders casting these crowns down before the throne of God in sheer awe.
Acknowledging that every good work we did, every reward we earned, was ultimately empowered by his grace. It's an endless cycle of receiving from him and offering back to him in worship.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the finite human mind simply cannot grasp the sheer volume of this infinite joy.
The notes quote the classic beloved hymn Amazing Grace to try and capture the scale of it.
When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we'd first begun. Time loses its tyranny.
Which brings us right back to you, the listener, and the focus we established at the very beginning of this deep dive.
Yes, how this changes your Tuesday morning.
When you realize that God has painstakingly prepared an eternal, physically perfect, dynamic home for you, when you realize that His absolute justice and His infinite love are held in perfect, beautiful harmony, when you realize that you are completely safe from the great white throne and invited to the table of the King, it should radically, completely deepen your devotion to Him right now.
It is the ultimate antidote to spiritual apathy. Knowing the ending changes how you read every single chapter leading up to it.
So let's briefly recap the incredible terrain we've covered today. We started by marveling at the mathematical impossibility and precise fulfillment of the prophecies of the suffering servant.
We looked ahead to the majestic, world-altering return of the reigning king in his Perugia.
We navigated the complex, varied viewpoints of the rapture and the Millennium maze, recognizing that good scholars disagree on the timeline, but all agree on the rescue.
We faced the stark, sobering realities of the judgments and hell.
And finally, we lifted our eyes to the awe-inspiring, dynamic promise of the new heaven and the new earth.
And as we close, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on the realities we've discussed today.
Let's hear it.
If heaven is ultimately about being in the unhindered, joyful presence of God, and if our eternal rewards at the Bema seat are based entirely on what we build on His foundation today, what wood, hay, or straw in your life right now needs to be traded for things of eternal weight? What temporary combustible pursuits are taking the energy that could be used to build with eternal gold and silver?
That is the question to carry with you this week. We want to thank you so much for taking this extensive deep dive with us.
It's been an incredible journey through the texts.
Remember, studying the end of the world isn't about fostering fear, drawing charts, or hiding in a bunker. It is about finding the ultimate, unshakable reason to love Christ more deeply today. Keep looking up, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.